let's go. Well, hello everybody, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you are. And welcome back to Webinar Wednesdays. We've had a short break for the summer, but it's wonderful to be back with you all, so welcome. Obviously, I'm not Stephanie Fox, you'd have noticed that by now. My name is Paul Squirrel, and I'm going to be moderating the webinar today. In a moment of, weakness, we let Stephanie have a short holiday, but she'll be back for the next one, don't worry. Just a few housekeeping points while we're getting started and people are still coming in. We will have a little 5-minute intro here and run through a few things. Then we're going to have a 35 to 40-minute presentation from our speaker today, followed by a Q&A. We'll aim to finish at 5 minutes to the hour. That's 1:55 London time, to allow you plenty of time to get to your next meeting or prepare for it, depending on what you're doing. We'd ask you to keep your microphones on mute at all times, please. We'll unmute you if we call on you to ask a question. That being said, we'd be really grateful if you'd leave your cameras on so our speaker can have some happy, smiley faces to look at, because that makes a big difference in this type of environment. We'll have a Q&A session right at the end, so if you have any questions, you can mail them to us in the chat and either ask them directly or we will ask them for you. The webinar is being recorded and it will be available to watch from our website in a few days' time, so you needn't scribble down notes if you don't want to. In the unlikely event that the system comes crashing down around our ears, please just give it a couple of minutes, then log back in using the same link and you'll get back into the Zoom room. Okay, right. Well, without further ado, I'd love to introduce today's speaker. Gillian Rightford is the founder of Adtherapy in South Africa. Her background is a mix of marketing, strategy, advertising, and leadership. She became co-founder and managing director of Hercules DMB&B in 1994, and then group managing director of Lowball in 2000, overseeing 9 of the companies in the group. In 2007, she started Adtherapy, a communications and management consultancy, whose clients were both marketeers, advertising, and advertising communications agencies right across the globe. Gillian is a public speaker on various aspects of marketing, strategy, creative, integrated communications, and reputational risk. So without further ado, it gives me tremendous pleasure to welcome Gillian Rightford from Cape Town. Gillian, over to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Paul. And hello, everybody. It's good to be here. I'm going to do my sharing the screen thing. So when I chatted to Paul and Julian and we spoke about possible topics to discuss, I was saying that my journey as a consultant has been quite interesting because I work in between the agency and client world, and so it's allowed me to see, to have a perspective that maybe I didn't have when I was actually in the business. And one of the things I do with Adtherapy is I do training, I do skills development for marketers and for agencies, and I also do pitch consulting. So the pitch consulting area is super interesting, obviously, as you know, because it's one of the areas of getting new businesses, obviously, through pitching. And it's just given me an interesting view, an interesting lens to have a look at how agencies are actually going about positioning themselves for new business. So I spoke to Paul and I said to him that when I was developing a course for the university, I was researching B2B marketing, and it occurred to me, I had this aha moment, and it occurred to me that agencies are B2B businesses, and many times, and honestly, that's so obvious now that I think about it, but many times we know that we work on B2B accounts, we have clients who are B2B, but I'm not sure that we always follow the rules ourselves as B2B companies. And I thought that was a really interesting angle, and I wondered whether that would be useful to sort of explore from a new business point of view. And if you sort of think about the steps that clients, that a B2B customer has to go through, in order to buy products or services, they are these things: the problem identification, solution exploration, requirements building, supplier selection, validation, consensus creation. And thinking about that, I mean, those steps sounds exactly like you would go through for a pitch, doesn't it? So, you know, they've identified a problem, they then start looking for possible venues or ways of solving that problem. They start putting a brief together, and then comes the supplier selection, the validation, and really importantly with pitches is the consensus creation. So I started looking at, and in fact, really it's the same for every single presentation that we do. And I think possibly the validation and consensus creation are areas that we don't really always take into account. So it was just an interesting kind of thought that I had in terms of what if agencies took the principles of B2B and applied them to themselves. And I don't know the makeup of your businesses. You know, some of you might be B2B experts and some of you might be doing some of the things that I'm going to talk about. But I just wanted to give you some perspective from my side and some of the things that I think that agencies could maybe do better, and some of the things that I think could help them in new business through this B2B lens. So the question here, and what I said in the beginning is, you know, B2B, you know, is it the question, the kind of do you apply what you know about B2B buying and the decision-making process to your own new business strategy and tactics? So I'm sure many of you are familiar with this work that was done for the LinkedIn B2B Institute by Les Bennett and Peter Field. And if you haven't read it, I've put the link at the bottom. It's a really, really good piece to read, and it's also, they have, the LinkedIn B2B Institute has a lot of really good pieces, so it's worth spending some time on reading some of their research. But basically what they did was they identified 5 principles of growth applied to B2B, and one of the things they were looking at specifically is they did a big piece of work around marketing B2C, and they were very interested to see how that actually applies if you then look at B2B, whether B2B is completely different or whether actually some of the principles are the same. And these 5 principles were still relevant for B2B, and I'm going to go through them reasonably quickly, but then I'm going to pull out what I think it means and where some opportunities are for agencies. So the 5 principles were: invest in share of voice, balance your brand building and activation, expand your customer base, maximize mental availability, and then harness the power of emotion, which is an interesting one for B2B because we don't always expect emotional decision making in that space. So principle 1, invest in share of voice. Obviously, there's a strong correlation between market share growth and extra share of voice for B2B brands, and there is a share growth percentage. And if you look, I don't know if you can see my arrow here, but if you look here, we would be, this is financial services, and then the other services, we would be in that column. Now, the thing with share of voice is that not a lot of agencies actually spend money on advertising specifically, and it's sometimes quite difficult to gauge what your competitors are doing, but it's just an interesting marker. The second principle was to balance brand building and sales activation. Obviously, you guys know this is what you do every day. So we know that brand building drives long-term growth, but the really interesting thing from an agency perspective is that it also reduces price sensitivity and increases margins. And if you think about the kind of the arm wrestling that goes on with pitches in terms of pricing, it's something that's very important to do. And I've got a little example when I speak about positioning too that I want to, I'll use as an example here. What they found was that the efficiency appears to be around 46% of the budget is allocated to brand and 54% to activation. So the questions that I would ask around those 2 principles are: how much brand building activity do you do for your agency? Do you have a marketing budget and a marketing lead, or is it something that kind of organically happens, driven by the MD or client service director or whatever? Which channels do you use? Many agencies I find use a combination of websites and a Facebook page maybe, and a few thought leadership articles on LinkedIn, but I'm going to talk more about that. And then what is your split between brand building and activation? So when they talk about activation, they're sort of talking about collateral, they're talking about short-term lead generating activity. And I think it would be interesting to have a look at what sort of activities you have and that you use regularly. Principle 3 is an interesting one because it is about developing an acquisition strategy and not just trying to sell more to existing clients, which is important because it's organic growth. But the point that they make here is that you actually need to extend your reach, and you need to be talking to people that you aren't necessarily ready to talk to, or they're not ready to talk to you right now. And they make the point that the category buyers might be quite a small group. So when you're looking at how to reach them, you would obviously need to look at people that would be known to influence them. So for instance, if your category buyer is a procurement person, the person who is actually the client at the end of the day, the marketing person or the brand manager might be a very influential person that you need to persuade. Also, they make the point, and I thought again this was quite interesting, that the brand targeting might include people that aren't yet in that role but might be getting to that role, and you would need to start talking to them. One of their findings was that, I mean, if I go back and you look at this chart here, loyalty strategy is basically delivers zero growth, whereas acquisition strategy is higher, and then the reach strategy is even higher. And what they say is that campaigns that make brand loyalty their primary focus underperform on every business metric. And I think that sometimes agencies spend most of their energy on their existing clients. So they want to develop loyal relationships, which they should do. But if that's all that you're doing, you're going to underperform on growth. So the questions there is, what is your acquisition strategy? Who are the buying committees that you need to talk to? There's procurement, who are the influencers, who are the end users, and who are the people making the decision? Who are the junior marketers, and who are your other influencers or gatekeepers? So CEO, the salespeople, finance people, pitch consultants, very importantly, partner agencies that you should be reaching, and how and where are you reaching them? Principle 4, and this is a key one, is about maximizing mental availability. So mental availability is often assumed. I don't need to explain to you what it is. Professor Byron Sharp, and he speaks about physical and mental availability, but mental availability is sort of brand salience and familiarity with the brand. And what they found was that people they think in B2B it doesn't matter as much, but of course that mantra of nobody ever got fired for buying IBM spoke directly to an emotional knowledge of the brand and the safety in buying that brand. So this notion of fame is really, really important. I think it almost for me is the most important, and I see that from a pitch point of view. So if you have a degree of fame, you're a much safer bet, and you're a much easier sell into the business. And they say, Peter Field and Les Binet was saying that campaigns that aim to increase a B2B firm's share of mind are the most effective. The more famous they make the company, the better the business results. So you can see on the chart that obviously there's awareness and then there's fame, and fame can come through a campaign, or it can come through reputation through awards, for example, or something else that you've done. So for me, fame is extremely important. And then this one is also extremely important. Principle 5, harness the power of emotion. So this is a very interesting one from a typical B2B kind of scenario, but emotional messaging is more effective in the long term. And I'm going to show you a little bit more about that, but massively more effective. So So it trumps logics for decision makers, business decision makers. And the more complex the decision, the more they rely on emotion. And emotion might be trust, because the brand is well known. It might be the way you put yourself out into the market. And I've got an example of it that I'll show you. So some of these stats, 95% of decision makers say that even before contacting a supplier, feeling a sense of connection to the brand is as important as feeling confident about what they do. I think that's huge. 62% of executives find it necessary or preferable to rely on subjective factors, and the harder the decision, the more emotional and subjective it can be. Reputation is the most influential factor, 70%, and then 2/3 of executives believe decisions are shaped by human emotion. So we know this, we tell our clients this: marketing is no longer about the stuff you make, but about the stories you tell. So an example I wanted to share is a South African agency, and it's called Joe Public, and they've got a very interesting stance in that they believe their purpose is to grow our country. So they do a lot of work that is outside of advertising. They partner with schools, they do all sorts of things, and they talk about it, and then they also try and work with their clients to do similar type of work. And what's interesting about this is that it's a story they tell, and it's a story they tell about their culture. And recently I was in a pitch situation, and their name came up, and one of the questions I asked is why, what else can you share about your business that might be interesting to the client? And they said, well, this is what we are and this is what we do. And the client completely resonated with the story that they are, they're there to help grow the people of South Africa, and that made a difference to the client. So it wasn't just saying we've got great proprietary tools and we're really good at analytics, and we've got 3 creative teams. It wasn't anything about that, but it was about a purpose that the client reacted to. So what could agency be doing better or differently using what we know about B2B buyers and buying? This is again stuff that you all apply to your client businesses all the time, but we need to, as agencies, understand the customer and our customer, understand their buying process, understand how to target each segment and stage of their decision journey, understand their pain points, agencies need to understand their value proposition and their positioning, and then invest in the right brand building and activation activities. So one of the areas that I think has, that I've realized doing the work that I do is that advertising is regarded as quite high risk within the businesses, and they've got to kind of balance out in a new business situation. It's a very complex decision-making process because they've got to balance off, they've got to trade off between value and risk. And there's a group of people that are trying to make that decision, and the need states of all of those people vary. So your need state of your procurement person is in one area, your need state of your CEO is in another area, and your need state of your marketer might be in a completely different area. And it is this kind of this trade-off between, if it's a big piece of business, it's high value, high risk. Usually the risk is quite intense, even if it is low value. So it's kind of where you fit on this chart, and then understanding also that the modern B2B buyer is very informed. They do their own research. They frequently, they will have, by the time they decide to reach out to you, whether it's the procurement person or whether it's the pitch consultant or whether it's the MD or the marketing person, they will probably have checked you out. They would have been on your website. They would have looked at your Facebook pages. They would have looked at you on LinkedIn. By the time they come to you, they sort of quite a way through the buying process. And it's worth understanding that complexity. It's also really, we know that this is how we sell it to our clients, but the point of the application of this is that we need to actually guide, we need to figure out where they are in the process and then guide them through the stages of their journey in a way that it actually addresses the pain points and that we talk to them where they are. So I quite like this little chart because it acknowledges that there are all these different people and that they each have different pain points. One of the most difficult things in a pitch is convincing the CEO, actually taking that into board approval if the board isn't involved in the pitch themselves. But what does our little junior brand manager think about things, and where can we find them, and what is their pain point, and how can we convince them to get on sides? One of the things I find quite interesting in pitches is that, and this was something I learned through one of the pitches I did, is often agencies don't bring the account person who is going to be working on the business. And yet the people sitting in the room are looking at your team and going, who's going to be my person? Who am I going to be interfacing with every day? So it's little things like that, kind of the chemistry almost needs to be at that level. Yes, it needs to be at that high level too. But the chemistry at the day-to-day level with the junior people is critical. And yet we don't always show that in pitches. So it's very interesting to do that, kind of really drill down into how their business is structured, how the decision, where they stand as marketers within their own business. Are they valued as marketers or are they not? Are they sort of fighting for their lives or do they have a lot of respect in the business, and really understanding what those pain points are. The other thing is that agencies need to have clear value propositions. They need to have clear positionings that separate them from their competitors, and they need to articulate them clearly. We do this for our clients, but we don't always do it for ourselves. So we have to build a story like Joe Public has done. We've got to build relevance, and we've got to build the emotional connection that helps in the decision making. So this is my favorite chart around positionings, competitive positionings by beloved brands. And he basically says, we need to, there's a circle here with what customers want. Then there's a circle here about what your competitor does best, and a circle about what you do best. The losing zone is where your competitor meets your customers' needs better than you do. How clearly do we know what our competitors offer? It's important that we are able to map ourselves against our competitors and find something differentiated. The risky zone is where our competitors and us equally meet customers' needs. And I would say a lot of agencies are in that space. And it's starting to become a thing with value-based costing where clients are saying, you know what, if you as an agency can do something that any of the other agencies can do the same, basically, then it's worth less, then I'll pay you less. But if you can clearly pull yourself apart, then it's worth more. So we need to have a look at this risky zone. The dumb zone is obviously competing with your competitors in an area that your clients actually don't care about. And the winning zone is where only you can do what your clients really want and do that best. So an agency that I would use as an example of that is a company called Actuate in South Africa, and they're very interesting. They do internal employee communication, and they work, they have a team of psychologists and industrial relations people. They focus on change management, but they're an agency because they do it through communication, but they are unique in the makeup of their people, and they're unique in their service offering. And so guess what? They win a lot of business, and they can charge a multiple of 7 times more than what the other agencies can. So I'm sure Paul was saying that Tim Williams has done a lot of these talks and a lot of he's got a lot of content on your Network One website, and he does a lot of work around how agencies should position themselves. And he talks about the fact that agencies tend to talk about features and not benefits. And if you go into websites, most websites, there are features and all over the place, and benefits not so much. So as he says here, plenty of features, no benefits. When you go after everybody, you're ideal for nobody. So it really is important to distill what your story is and where you are better and have a compelling differentiator from your clients, from your competitors. Once you know that, you can then go and use the normal B2B touch points and talk to people where they are in their journey in the right channels with the right message. There are lots of tactics that can be used. A website is still important, but I'm going to talk about that in a minute. All of these things we know, we do it all the time. But how many of these are you actually doing for your own agency? So I just want to pull out 3 of them that I think are really important, and website content and brand advocacy. So the website is really important because, as I said, it's kind of where most potential buyers, whether they're the marketer or the procurement person or the pitch consultant, it's where they're going to start. It's also actually important from a talent point of view, because they're going to start at your website and they're going to learn about your company there. So half of all B2B customers today expect the supplier's website to be helpful. More than a third expect the site to be the most effective. And it's important that your website's not a brochure. It's not a portfolio. It's actually it's trying to sell you while you're sleeping. But the main reason that people abandon websites is there's no contact info. There's no clear calls to action. And there's no, so most agency websites have the same stuff. It has our story, our awards, our work, our culture, our people, contact us. Now, having just, I'm in a pitch process right now. The one, I've really struggled to get hold of people. I've had to stalk them on LinkedIn. I've had to find them in their DMs on Twitter. I've phoned reception. Reception can't give me a cell number because obviously people are still working from home here. It's crazy. It's like, let me make it easy for me to contact you. I want to give you money. Please make it easy for me. So a lot of agency websites are incredibly slow because they are loaded with video material, and they're slow. They talk about themselves. They talk about, where we have offices. No one cares. But they're actually, and that's not true. It's not no one cares. But what are the key questions you need to answer? They're not easy ways to talk to people, and they are not differentiated. So Tim Williams writes about the fact that most agencies, if you look at their websites, basically everybody does what everybody else does. So how can you show up in a way that showcases your skills? But most importantly, how can you immediately get them to contact you? So this was a local agency that I was looking at the other day. I've actually got a lovely website. And they had this little device here, which was, and this is after I've been trawling through websites, trying to find a contact information. These guys just have a little WhatsApp icon. And you know what? It goes straight to the MD. I was in contact with him in seconds, and not having to, find him in his Twitter DMs on the 3rd round after he ignored his LinkedIn message, after the receptionist wouldn't give me his number. This is important. So, but leading into my second point around content marketing, because I think this makes a really strong point relating also to websites, is this quote at the top here. Most companies build content strategies in the name of thought leadership, brand awareness, and personalization, focusing primarily on their own features and benefits. However, as it turns out, there's significant commercial benefit for companies that focus their content on customers and helping them through the purchase process. So if you think about somebody viewing your website and wanting to buy you, are you helping them to make, are you answering their questions? So one of the things that I found frustrating is a lot of agencies won't show their clients on their websites. And that's fine. I mean, somebody said to me, oh, but if we show our clients, our competitors come and steal our people, which I thought, okay, that was quite innovative. But at least make it easy for me to see whether you've got a competitive client or not, so that I know whether that you're in or you're not in. So how do you actually then manage that in a way that you actually are buyer enablement? You're creating buyer enablement. So when we talk about content, we're talking about, blogs and videos and how-tos and all of those things that we do for our clients. But in the B2B area, buyers view at least 8 pieces of content during the purchase process. And I would say that it's no different in an agency pitch environment. Once the shortlist is compiled, or even before the shortlist is compiled, the client's going to go and have a look at stuff. They're going to go and see what you're doing on LinkedIn. They're going to maybe watch a couple of videos, and the content significantly impacts their buying decision. But what it should do is, how do you move them along and make it easier for them to buy? So if you see content as a proof point of what you can do, and you can do better than anyone else, but content also as a way to start building your fame, there are ways of saying, well, how can we display our authority and our expertise and our proof of results, as well as shareable pieces that marketers can then distribute to the other stakeholders, like the CEO. So a lot of stuff like how-tos, training videos, case studies, all of that sort of thing helps determine your expertise, surely. But if you can find a way of doing it slightly differently, or showing that you were able to get a different result because of the way that you think, or whatever, the clients are looking at that. So testimonials and reviews, your other client testimonials help enormously, because in the marketing community, I've done research on this, the number one source of reliable and trusted information is other marketers. So if you've got clients that are happy to do that, brilliant. Obviously PR, obviously all of the awards, partnerships, etc., case studies, but also stories that clearly position your strengths in a competitive way, or even your belief system, like Joe Public's. Important that you are clear about what you want the content to do. So do you want to increase the number of job inquiries? Do you want to increase your number of pitches? I find a lot of the time agencies are quite reactive about this sort of thing, and rather wait for it to come in. But I think if you sit down, like we do with clients, and say, right, what are your goals? How are we going to measure the success of it? Really have a dig around and see where each of those people that you've determined are important to talk to, where are they? I mean, are they on LinkedIn? Are they consuming ebooks? Are they downloading podcasts? It's interesting to have a little dig around, and some of them will be in different places. And then how can you reach them? I wanted to put this chart up. It is out of date, sadly, and I think that the company actually got bought. It was a company called Track Maven, and they got bought, and they published these wonderful reports. But when they were bought, they stopped publishing them. But I just think it's an interesting thing to consider. So they looked at social media audience by industry, and we would be in the professional services space, and it is enormous. What's also interesting about it is that that they found that in the professional services category, Instagram was by far the most effective channel for professional services brands in terms of engagement. And I saw on Twitter this morning, someone was talking about TikTok now becoming such an interesting space for professional services brands, and being very, very engaging. So LinkedIn is good, obviously, but are you on Instagram? I wouldn't have been on Instagram if I was still an agency, probably, I don't know. Pinterest is also interesting. So it's just important to kind of say, where are these people? And it's a human to human conversation. Where can you have a conversation with them that's helping them along the buyer's journey? The last thing is about creating advocacy. And this is kind of where you're using your strong relationships with your existing clients to talk about you, to recommend you. You turn your clients into advocates, also considering your partner agencies, whether it's a media agency or a PR agency or whatever agency you're working with, and you've got good relationships with them. They obviously can be a massive referral source to their clients and to other people. So one way to do this, and I think this is an area that most agencies are actually pretty good at, is to create, customize, and focus content for your existing clients that can add value to their business and in turn to yours. So things like speaker engagements, trend presentations, creative trends and innovation, case studies based in category, and then actually help them with skills development. So a lot of the work that I do is around training, and I run a creative fitness program for marketers. And it's about the inputs into creativity. It's about how to work with an agency and get good work out of the end of it. And very often they'll say to me, I wish I knew how to do this. I wish I had known. No one's ever shown me how to evaluate a piece of advertising and give constructive feedback. And yet this is what we're asking them to do, but they don't always have the right experience and skill sets. So I think there's a beautiful opportunity to help grow their skills and in turn create advocates out of them. And lastly, build your fame, build your mental availability, build your brand salience, build your relevance. And awards are obviously one way to do this, but the awards need to be sort of relevant to your potential buyers. And I think that when we talk about that, we need to actually discuss, you know, what it meant and what the results were. And, you know, if you're talking to a financial business, how that particular award maybe that was given not by an industry body, but maybe by a business body, those things are really, really important. And I think along with fame, I would put the very clear articulation of your brand positioning is part of fame. So what does your brand stand for? What does your agency stand for? So that they're already partially convinced by the time they start talking to you. My final thought, and I have been talking very quickly, so my final thought is this saying, the cobbler's kids have no shoes. So basically it means that, you know, we do this every day, but we focused on other people's, we focused on our clients' activities and not so much on ours. Many agencies' new business activity is reactive. They wait for pitch invitations or referrals. Sometimes it's cheeky. We really want to work with that brand and we're going to do whatever we can to do it. And of course, those things are fine and they're good. One of the challenges actually with becoming famous is that you have to have a very robust new business strategy because everybody then wants to be with you. So there is a flip side to being famous, but it's a good flip side because it allows you to be very strategic in the pitches you accept. So you need to build your reputation and your fame carefully and consciously as you do for clients. You have to make time for it. You have to allocate funds to it. You have to measure it and you have to set long-term goals. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Stephen Covey's important and urgent matrix. So he speaks about things that are important and urgent, being the things that we do immediately because they're important and urgent. But the important but not urgent are the things that fall by the wayside because we're too busy chasing after the important and urgent and the non-important and urgent, which is just noise. The thing is that if we focus on the important but not urgent, and we do the not urgent stuff and we make it urgent, it delivers growth, and it's a far better strategy than just ignoring it because we're busy. You know how to do all of this, everything I've told you today, you do it for your clients. But the point of it all is imagine the power of doing it for you. And that's the end of my thing. And that is where you can find me. You can find me on Twitter and on my website, which sadly is not as good as it should be. And on LinkedIn, and I've got a blog and I've got podcasts and I've got Facebook and I've got all of those things. But those are my thoughts. I'd love to have a Q&A with you and just have a chat.
Gillian, great, lovely. Thank you so much for all of that. Some really great stuff there. And I was just sort of sitting here thinking, Yes, need to do that. Yes, need to do that. No, we've done that bit. So, and I think, as you said at the end there, what really sort of sums it up is actually we do know how to do all of this. We've actually just got to get around to doing it. Remember that we have to. We have had some questions in, and I'm just going to run through some of those if that's okay. Fran Valmana, any advice on how to learn, understand how the internal procurement process of a prospective client works?
I think you could just ask them. I mean, I think that everyone is slightly different, but I think that I think most of them would be pretty open to disclosing it. If you're in a pitch, they'll certainly tell you. But I think that if it's a company that you're sort of interested in, and I think you could just phone them and ask them, just say, how do you guys run your new business? How do you look to choose agencies? I mean, most of them will, if they have a formal procurement division or person, it does sometimes vary about what type of procurement they are, because sometimes they sit in finance and then they have very different way of evaluating, and sometimes they are marketing procurement. And I would possibly develop some scenarios for both, because they have different need states. And then, you know, probably you could find out by looking at their company website or getting their you know, annual report, or just asking.
Okay, great, thank you. Question from Kieran Black. Hi, Gillian. You mentioned 3 primary platforms: LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. What about Instagram?
Yeah, I mean, Instagram, absolutely, it comes out quite strongly. So Instagram, I think, is important, but again, it's who you're talking to. So who is there? Who is scrolling through? What are they wanting to see? What are they watching? Are they watching you know, video content, or are they interested in downloadable content or whatever? Instagram, I think, is very important. But likewise, I think something like TikTok is also really interesting, and it's growing. But I think the point is you need to kind of do your map, figure out who those people are and where they are, and then build strategies to talk to them where they are.
Okay, and following up on the social media thing, here's an interesting one for you. Is it acceptable to WhatsApp a prospective client?
I would say no. And I tell you why, because I think WhatsApp is quite a personal channel, and it's a bit spammy for me. It's a professional relationship. I would reach out to them through their professional contacts. I would phone them rather than WhatsApp them, to be honest, but I am a bit old and I do still quite like the phone. So I think that, you know, that example I gave of the agency that has their WhatsApp, if they've made their WhatsApp available, happy days. But I also think, you know, sometimes you can contact them on LinkedIn and their direct messages. I mean, there are ways of getting to people, but one of the things to be careful of is not to be too salesy. You know, what is the benefit for them talking to you? What can you offer them that they're not currently already getting?
Okay, thank you. Okay, going a bit digital old school, I guess here. In your top 3, you didn't mention email marketing. Is this a new business tool?
It's on the content slide that I just went over quickly. It's really, really important. It's good. It definitely works. And if you are writing a newsletter, for example, and it's of value and it's pulling together trends and it's, you know, making things relevant, I think it's super, super important for your existing clients. But I also think it's a way of developing thought leadership and expertise, credentials, and all of that to other clients. So yes, it's on the list, and it's extremely powerful, and especially if you know, clients are exposed to so much. They've got so much going on in their lives, and they don't have time to read a lot. So they'll read 1 or 2 industry press, if you've got them, like Marketing Week, or you've got those sort of publications, and they'll read a few of that. But if you can aggregate or collate and make it relevant to them, you are really helping them a lot, and they will appreciate that a lot.
Okay, okay. Damien Harwood has asked, has the adversity of the pandemic impacted the pitch process in your experience?
Yeah, I think it has. I think that the one thing that is quite difficult to do in online is the chemistry session. So I think that it's quite hard. You're not reading body language. You're not, whatever. Presenting creative, if you have a creative pitch, is also hard, especially when everyone has their cameras off, because you literally just shouting into a void and you can't read you can't read the responses at all. So I think that I've run successful pitches through the pandemic, but I think definitely it's a kind of a poor substitute, to be honest, for the in the room experience. But it is doable. And the other thing that I would just say is, from a presentation point of view, I ran quite a big pitch last year, and it did involve some creative work, which I don't always like, but it did. And the problem was that it just caused such tech problems. So you've got 20 people on the other side, from the CEO to the whatever, and they don't all have fiber, and then they can't see the thing, and then it's slow, and then the sound's not working. So I would be very careful about the audiovisual material that you show. And also, kind of 3 out of the 5 agencies ran out of time. And I don't know what, and the problem with running out of time is that there's a hard stop. There's a hard stop. The CEO is not going to hang around because he's got another meeting starting the minute after your meeting ends. So that was a bit of a learning, to be very careful about the time, and also to be very careful about what you show and the impact it might have on the quality of the engagement. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks, Gillian. Here's an interesting one. In the quest for fame, should agencies run ad campaigns about themselves?
Yeah, I think they should.
Yeah.
I think they should. I know it's the worst brief ever, it's kind of finding something to say about ourselves, but I think they should. I mean, I think they should be in the financial press, and they should be in the places where, whether it's you run it on Instagram or where you choose to run it, but where is your audience and how are they going to know about you? I think it's quite interesting, because a lot of, I did this research, and I asked CMOs, I interviewed 40 CMOs, and I said to them, what is your main source of information around the industry? And it was other marketers. And it was, yes, press, but they're not, this is sometimes a tiny, what we do is sometimes a tiny part of their jobs. So they're not up to date on, who's doing what and the movers and shakers and things like that, unless they get that news from other marketers, or unless they stumble across an ad. Or, it could be on a bus stop, it could be on it could be anywhere on the way home or whatever. But I just don't think we do enough of that. And it might be because it's expensive, but I think it's also just because we are more focused on growing our clients' businesses than we are on our own.
Yeah, okay, great, thank you. I think we've got time for one more. So a traditional strategy is to offer clients some free research into their business sector. Does this still work in your view?
I'm anti anything that's free, because I think it cheapens the service. I think that agencies, again, Tim Williams, I'm like his cheerleader, but he wrote a fantastic article about the smile curve, and it's an engineering thing, and it's about high value thinking at the beginning of a project and at the end of a project, and that the low value stuff is the actual implementation. And he says agencies tend to give away the high value stuff at the top, at the beginning and at the end. And we tend to spend all of our energy fighting around the executional aspects, which client is taking in-house anyway, and it's low margin. So why do we want it? So I would say certainly partner with them certainly suggest it. And then I would ask them to contribute to it. Maybe give them a discount or a whatever. If it's going to help you also understand the category, then, you know, that's your investment into that. But I think it's dangerous to give really good thinking away for free.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Well, I'm conscious of the time, and I know that we're all very busy people, so we've exhausted, I think, a lot of the questions. But anyhow, I'd like to draw to a bit of a close here, and I'd like to offer a huge thanks to Gillian. What a great webinar! And as I said earlier, I think we've all learnt or relearned some really interesting stuff there. And if you'd like to get hold of Gillian, if you didn't have a chance to ask your questions, Gillian can be contacted. Her email is Gillian@Adtherapy, and I'll just try and share the details with you on the screen here, which I hope you can now all see. Yeah, great. So if you'd like to, please do get in contact with Gillian directly. As I say, there are her details. Thank you all for coming. We really hope you've enjoyed the webinar today. We do these once a month, and we'll be doing one again next month. For future webinars, please check out our website, thenetwork1.com/webinars, where you'll find both listings of new webinars that are coming up, but there's also, as Gillian mentioned, a vast content library now of stuff that we've done over the last 18 months or so, and there's some really good content in there if you want to watch it over a lunch or something, or share with your colleagues. If you'd like to be the first to know about webinars that are coming up, please do drop us a line. Stephanie will be back shortly, so you can send an email to her at stephanie.fox@thenetwork1.com, and we'll gladly add you to our mailing list. One final plug, we are still open for the Indie Awards, so if anyone out there would like to enter the Indie Awards, please go to the Indie Awards website, and you can find a link to that, the indieawards.global on our website, or just go there directly. So once again, I'd like to thank Gillian. Gillian, thank you so much for your time today. Really enjoyed that. We'll stay around for a few minutes if you want to stick around and ask questions to Gillian personally, but otherwise, thank you everybody. Great to see you all.